We're following the latest developments on the volatile situation in Iran. The U.S. has requested a United Nations Security Council meeting this afternoon.
More than 20 people have been killed. Hundreds have been arrested in anti-government protests across the country. Iran's weak economy, high food prices, and corrupt government have fueled demonstrations over the past week. For more on this, we want to bring in Willis Sparks. He's a writer for G0 Media's Signal newsletter. He's also a CBSN contributor and part of a new partnership between CBS News and G0 Media, a Eurasia Group company. Willis, thanks for joining us. Happy New Year.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy New Year.
So how do you see this situation playing out? We've heard reports from the government saying that the protests are actually dying down, that there have been fewer over the last day or so than in the past. But can these protests actually affect change in Iran?
Probably not. Probably not in the near term. And by the way, there have also been some pro-government protests, which have been very carefully organized by the government. As you can imagine, they're getting a lot of play in government-controlled media there. So there's a lot going on. It's not simply there's a new colored revolution on the horizon. But the underlying reality is that Iranians are becoming more aware of what they don't have. I mean, what I wrote about in Signal this week was there are a couple of things that outsiders think of as unqualified good things. The nuclear deal, which is supposed to kickstart Iran's economy, and greater transparency in government. The problem is that the nuclear deal hasn't really kickstarted the Iranian economy because Iran is spending the money to revive its oil program over the longer term. And in terms of government transparency, well, the government's saying, we want you to see what's in our budget. People don't like what they see. Subsidies are being cut. More money is being spent on foreign policy. These protests are liable to die down in the next few days. They don't really pose any kind of existential threat to the government.
It's nothing like what we saw during the Green Revolution.
No, it's not as big as what we saw in 2009, where we had a lot of people in major cities. But the underlying issues that are driving these protests are not going away. So this is another issue for a leadership in Iran that claims its legitimacy from a revolution that happened in 1979. In other words, a revolution that more and more Iranians every year are not old enough to remember. That's a long-term problem, and it's not going away.
What's your take on how the president has been reacting to this? His tweet supporting the protesters. You know, the sort of counter argument is that that's precisely the type of thing that the government loves, because then they can say, look at this. You know, these protesters are not homegrown; they're being supported by outside forces.
No, that's right. I mean, the government says the Iranian government has said these protests are the creation of the enemies of Iran, meaning Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia.
So
and
do
in
those
some
tweets
ways,
feed into that?
Well, yes. On the other hand, there is a role for the president to play in saying we support free speech, and we don't believe that the government should be putting down people who have legitimate grievances. You can only go so far with that. The President of the United States, whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump or a future U.S. president, has very limited power to effect change inside of Iran, whatever happens at the UN Security Council. But sure, support free speech, question the government's ability to crack down on its own people, but don't think you're going to change the outcome.
Let's stay in the region, Willis. The Trump administration announced yesterday its plan to freeze aid to Pakistan. I want to read from a tweet the president posted a couple of days ago. The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. A lot of people agree with President Trump on this, in the sense that we've known, for many, many years that whilst Pakistan has been an ally in the global war on terror, they've also had it both ways, where they've fed into some of the networks that they support that we consider terrorists, for example, the Haqqani network. So is the president right in doing this?
Well, he's trying to apply pressure. This is probably a hardball negotiating tactic. Look, this is it's going to be popular with the Trump space and beyond Trump space. A lot of Americans remember that when we found Osama bin Laden in 2011, that he was living in Abbottabad, Pakistan. He was close enough to the military academy of Pakistan, he could have ordered a pizza from the school cafeteria and walked over to pick it up.
And even
people remember that.
And I recall even when we, the United States, were surprised when Pakistan set off its nuclear weapons, We had no idea that they were that close. We thought that we had been applying pressure for them to not acquire those weapons, and all of a sudden they've got a nuclear power.
Then they test it, because that's really about India more than it's about the U.S. But President Trump is right that Pakistan is not doing everything it can do to help stabilize Afghanistan, to crack down on terrorist groups. On the other hand, and here's where it's a double-edged sword, the Chinese are looking at this thinking, here's a wonderful opportunity for us. Here's an opportunity for us to increase our influence in Pakistan, which for all kinds of strategic reasons, very attractive to China. So the U.S., again, this is another place where any president of the United States has limited leverage. So President Trump is quite right about the criticism, but if the alternative is to wash our hands of what we call a major non-NATO ally, you're only further reducing U.S. influence in the region.
And we should point out, well, as we've said, that we understand that Pakistan sometimes plays that dual role.
Yeah, always.
How important is the ISI, for example, in helping the United States go after certain terror networks?
They're very important, but as you said in your question, they're playing both sides. The military, the ISI, have absolute control over Pakistan's foreign and security policy. That's not the civilian government. They have in the past done something to earn some of the money that we send, and yet they do not do what U.S. presidents have asked. This is not just about President Trump. President Obama had sharply lowered the amount of aid that we were sending to the Pakistani military. It's a bipartisan question. But again, there's a reason why we allow Pakistan to play both sides, because some of this is useful and because a positive relationship with Pakistan gives the U.S. long-term influence, long-term foothold in South Asia, which is very useful.
Right, so while we have you here, we're going to get you for every topic we can get you for, right? So we're going to bounce to domestic stuff. The hot topic now is this new book,
Trump versus
Fire and
Bannon.
Fear. You got it.
Yeah.
Clearly there is a rift between these two. The president has threatened to sue Bannon. What do you think the fallout of this will be? Will it have an impact on the Republican Party? I mean, Bannon had basically threatened to, unseat any mainstream Republican that he had an opportunity to.
Yeah, he's not batting 1,000 on that.
Nah, well, it's not so. Yeah, Alabama didn't work out. But
yeah, and Mitt Romney's about to run for the Senate in Utah, and that's going to drive Steve Bannon insane. There's not a lot he can do about it.
So, what do you think the fallout of this will be, or will it just blow over after tomorrow? By the weekend, we'll be talking about something else.
I think this is less about the Republican Party and more about the conservative side of media. Steve Bannon's not going to win a battle with Donald Trump, and he knows that. He's already backtracking and saying public things about, what a big supporter he is of the president. And, you don't say his son committed treason, though, and come back and say, but I really support the president.
Yeah. Although he's not backing away from saying that, in other words, he hasn't refuted that he said those things.
Well, it may be on tape. So,
and not just that there was no way that President Trump didn't know about this meeting. I mean, he said that too, and maybe he's sort of guessing there.
And there's more people. There's also people on the record talking about how when they drafted the statement on the airplane to characterize Donald Trump's meeting with the Russians, that a lot of people were involved. But the reason why I think this is more about conservative media over the long term than it is about the Republican Party is the real question is what happens to Breitbart. There are a lot of rumors that Breitbart Media, which has been enormously successful playing to the conservative media market, that they may cut ties with Steve Bannon.
But Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked that question yesterday during the White House press briefing, and she said that they should consider that. That's another time, and this is not a red or blue issue. This is just another example of this White House seemingly attempting to dictate to businesses who they should hire and who they should fire. Whether it's Breitbart or the NFL, should the White House be telling private businesses who they should hire and who they shouldn't?
This is no different from the cease and desist letter and the attempt to stop publication of a book. It's absurd, but Sarah Huckabee Sanders knows that Donald Trump is watching on TV upstairs. She's speaking to him. But the larger point here is, which way is Breitbart going to go with this?
Follow the money?
Because Breitbart, they probably will follow the money. And it's a reminder that the basis of Steve Bannon's power has always been his access to power and his access to his Breitbart Media.
The Mercer family.
And if he doesn't have those things, then who is he? It's not like he's got millions of supporters as President Trump does. He's not going to win that war. So watching him kind of maneuver his way into the next stage. But it just makes you wonder, why did he say these things to Michael Wolff in the first place?
Right.
That I have no answer.
And the president this morning came up with a new nickname. We've always enjoyed the president's nicknames for people.
I haven't heard
Sloppy
this.
Steve.
Yeah,
Sloppy Steve is now. Sloppy Steve is trending on Twitter right now, and I can tell you that this one tweet has been more or less uniting the Twitterdom, because
it's
people
hard to say Sloppy Steve 5 times fast. I'm trying to.
A lot of people will try Sloppy Steve. Right. So before we let you go, Willis, the Signal newsletter. Oh no, we wanted to talk about China.
Oh, this is so fascinating.
This is Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie's been like pouring over this.
Yeah, but this was in the Signal newsletter too. Yeah. This idea of China's social credit system. I thought it was just an idea that they were floating, but they've actually started to install this. And first off, explain
what is it?
What the social credit system is.
Okay.
Because it's something out of Black Mirror. If you know this, if you watch the show, you know I love Black Mirror.
Yeah,
it's something right out of Black Mirror. Yeah.
Well, the social credit system is it's like the credit system that we have in this country, where it's available information. How much money do you owe? Do you pay your bills on time? How do you manage your money? How many loans do you have? The kind of stuff that determines whether we're a good credit risk. Now, add other questions. Add the question of, do you obey the law? Do you attend protests? Are you politically loyal to the Chinese Communist Party? Now, this is a very early stage of development for the so-called social credit system. I wrote it in Signal today because a Washington Post correspondent wrote a very interesting tweet saying she's on a train from Tianjin to Beijing, and she hears a public address announcement, a recorded message saying, by the way, if you misbehave on this train, it's going to hurt your credit score. Now,
your social credit score.
Your social credit score.
Yeah.
Think about the implications of this. If misbehavior on a train can hurt your social credit score, then misbehavior in the street, in the form of protests. Have you attended a protest lately? What were you protesting? Have any of your family and friends been involved in protests? Have you done enough to talk them out of participating in protests? And social credit score matters even more than the credit scores that we're aware of, because it might determine, can you get a job? Can you get an education? Can your children get an education? Are you allowed to travel? Will you have a pension? Will you get an apartment?
Could it get you thrown in jail?
So
that's the worst case scenario.
This is a double-edged sword. I keep using that phrase because it will do a lot of good in helping to maintain social order. If people are making defective products, you want to know about it.
Right.
If a restaurant is serving food that makes people sick, you want to know about it.
But we kind of already have that.
But what scares me is if China can do it,
that's right.
Then who else can do it?
The rest of the world is watching, and for governments that really are obsessed with maintaining social order, if it works in one country, they're going to want to buy it. And they're going to want to develop their own version of it. And it's just, I put it in Signal because I think it's something that we really need to all be thinking through. And not just in China, in this country and in Europe.
All of our information
Our ability
is available.
to use big data can do a lot of good in the world for a lot of people, but it also comes with a lot of dangers that we have to start thinking about.
Such a great discussion.
I know. I can't wait to have you back again.
I know. I mean, if this is going to be a regular segment, we are looking forward to it because Anne-Marie and I can talk with you we can do a whole hour show, I think.
I will be here, absolutely.
Willis Sparks, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.